that oil's not going anywhere, right? Because there is a panoply, at least of U.S. law, that allows for this kind of action.
Biggest tanker ever seized. Big, beautiful tanker.
Well, I do want to highlight this tanker apparently claimed to have been under a flag of Guyana, and Guyana said, no, it wasn't, not ours. And even separate from any kind of sanctions regime, there's international law and U.S. law that allows our Coast Guard to board a ship to say, what's your nationality? What flag are you flying? And this is to inspect them essentially, right? Under the law of the sea. And there's an international convention on the law of the sea.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, if this might be the best time, because I was looking at the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea for a number of topics, because I've noticed that there's an argument everywhere that's being made about the shooting of the speedboats. So I know it's not exactly to this ship, but maybe you can just broadly discuss this question of the law of the sea, because shooting the speedboats, they're saying, well, they have no flag, so they're stateless, so therefore you can...
Well, that's ridiculous, right? Because the law of the sea regarding the tanker, if we look at the tanker, allows the United States Coast Guard to board it, right? To inspect it for being, flagged, and here it wasn't flagged. And so it was in violation of international law and norms of how to be a vessel on the high seas. The alleged drug boats, completely different thing, right? So just because you're not flying a proper flag doesn't mean you get to be blown out of the water, blown into smithereens by targeted airstrikes, right? And so if we look at that operation quote unquote Southern Spear, we have not seen the Office of Legal Counsel memo from the Department of Justice yet, which apparently rationalizes in some Alice in Wonderland narrative this supposed non-international armed conflict against amorphous drug cartels. So the Trump administration is not claiming law enforcement for blowing those boats out of the water. They're claiming that we're at war, and they're doing so because the law of war allows for killing and destroying things based on status versus based on the threat they pose at the moment. Because as your listeners know, and typical law enforcement, like downtown Los Angeles or downtown, in Austin, Texas, police can shoot people only when they have a reasonable belief that they're facing an imminent threat of deadly force, right? And that goes for the high seas. These alleged drug boats were not posing any kind of imminent threat. So the only way to just target them is to claim that we're at war and that they're a military objective and that they're individuals or some kind of combatants, right, based on their status. This is so far out. I'm happy to provide a mini lecture. It's so far
Well, let
out
me
of
ask
law.
a question about international law also.
Absolutely.
Dan Kovalik has filed a lawsuit. He's representing the family of a fisherman who was killed. I actually have a little clip from that. Let's take a look at that, and then I'll ask you.
Absolutely.
I do want to ask you, though, how certain you are that you will see any compensation by suing U.S. officials, in that the client that you have is not a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, well, that's not a problem. That's why we brought this before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which gives a venue for non-U.S. citizens within the Western Hemisphere to bring a petition against the United States as a state for various remedies, including compensation. Now, with that said, am I certain they'll get compensation? I mean, whenever you bring a case, you can't be certain of that. But this is an avenue to do that, and I think with this case combined with public pressure, which I think is building against these strikes, I do think we can get them compensation, and I think this case will play a part in ending these killings.
Am I the only one who's never heard of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
It is a thing, and I've actually cited some of their case law, but they have no enforcement power of the United States, and so this is more symbolic. But it's highlighting the fact that there's actually law out there that regarding when an armed conflict exists, right? When war, and that's the modern term for war. And yes, we can be at war against non-state actors. Look at ISIS. Look at Al Qaeda. These were organized armed groups. That's a key. An organization that's a group that's organized enough to be able to carry out pretty massive levels of protracted violence against a state. We're basically saying you're like a state and you're engaged in violence against us like you're a state, so we're at war we can be at war against you. I mean, there was a classic, it started off with the Civil War model, but now it's morphed into, transnational armed groups that are actually either about to engage in war against the United States, like right before those planes flew into the Twin Towers on 9/11, or they've already done it, right? And we have intelligence they're going to continue to fight us. That's a war, a non-international armed conflict. We have no level of organization necessary to meet the first prong within these groups. And number two, where's the protracted armed violence against the United States? It's just not there. So to pretend that this is a non-international armed conflict is just, it's not supported by the actual facts.